Welcome to the Roeliff Jansen Historical Society's summer exhibition, Patriots, Plowshares, and Post Roads, chapters from our local journey to independence. Against the backdrop of the Revolutionary War, the exhibit explores the smaller but significant stories of individuals, industry, transportation, and self-sufficiency that helped lay the foundations for the area's independence and economic growth. The exhibit will be open Saturdays and Sundays 2 to 4 p.m. from July 11th through October 2026. The exhibit also offers a series of pre-registered workshops, presentations, and site visits. These programs will actively connect visitors with the time of the Revolution in our corner of what was then the province of New York. In essence, the American Revolution was not a single event, but one of many local actions, decisions, and grassroots efforts that gradually merged into a coordinated rebellion against British rule that went on for over 8 years. In his 1878 book, The History of Columbia County, Captain Franklin Ellis described how residents in the county first heard the mutterings of discontent following the Stamp Act and the Boston Massacre, sounds that grew into the unmistakable roar of revolution. Soon, Ellis wrote, the patriotic flame burst forth and spread through all the colonies, burning as brightly upon the shores of the Hudson and along the slopes of the Taconic Mountains as it did upon the plain of Bennington and the banks of the Brandywine. Although no major battles occurred here, the landscape and people of Columbia County were deeply connected to the war effort. One of the most remarkable episodes was the 1775-76 winter trek of Colonel Henry Knox and his noble train of artillery. Acting under orders from General George Washington, Knox and his team transported 59 cannon, more than 60 tons of artillery from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston through snow, swamps, rivers, and mountain terrain. Part of that route passed through present-day Kinderhook, Ghent, and Hillsdale's Nobletown Road before entering Massachusetts. The transported artillery was essential in forcing the British evacuation of Boston in March of 1776. Historical markers all along the route allow present-day enthusiasts to trace what Knox himself called a noble and glorious enterprise. The revolutionary effort was also supported by the industrial power of the Livingston family and the Ancram Iron Works, established in 1743. The first in New York Colony. As we'll learn in a talk by historian Jim Mackin, during the war, the ironworks produced iron used to make cannon shot and links for a massive Hudson River chain that stretched between Fort Montgomery and Anthony's Nose, a barrier designed to prevent British ships from advancing upriver. In 1778, the more successful Great Chain was installed across the Hudson near West Point. Though the original furnace is gone, the paper mill established on the same site in 1854 remains the longest continuously operating business in Columbia County. At the same time, the great Hudson Valley manors functioned as agricultural engines for the Revolution. The vast estates of Livingston Manor and Rensselaerwick, the patroonship of the Rensselaer family, supplied wheat, livestock, and preserved foods that helped sustain Washington's Continental Army. Yet, this productivity existed within a rigid tenant farming system, based in British and Dutch traditions, where farmers leased land under long-term agreements that often restricted their independence and kept them in debt. Even so, local farms became essential contributors to the revolutionary cause, producing grain and livestock used to make long-lasting hardtack and salt pork for the troops in the field. The manor system also supported other industries, including an expanding network of mills. Robert Livingston authorized the construction of grist mills, sawmills, textile mills, paper mills, and even gunpowder mills, all along local streams and waterways. One important example was Mill Success, a grist mill established around 1720 along the Taconic Creek. After threshing wheat at home, neighboring farmers hauled their grain to the mill to be ground into flour. The miller and the manor owner received a portion as payment, while the remainder returned to the farmer. Though converted into a sawmill in 1790, remnants of Mill Success still survive today at Pumpkin Hollow Retreat in Taconic, one of several locations visitors will be able to explore through exhibition site visits. British trade laws sharply restricted textile manufacturing in the colonies, forcing Americans to rely heavily on imported cloth. During the Revolution, however, the homespun movement became both an economic necessity and a patriotic act. Large estates expanded their sheep flocks, while local mills processed wool into fabric for civilian use and for the Continental Army. Although these early mills have disappeared, the region's textile tradition continues today through Nobletown Fiber Works, which draws inspiration from the area's long history of spinning, carding, weaving, and wool production. Transportation and communication were equally vital to the growth of the new nation. The colonial Albany Post Road, also known as the King's Highway, served as the principal mail and stage route between New York City and Albany. Today, much of the old Post Road route survives as nearby U.S. Route 9 and 9H. The term post, derived from the Latin postium, meaning placed or fixed, originally referred to a station where fresh relay horses were hitched and kept ready for post riders carrying letters and dispatches. The word mail comes from the Old French malle, meaning a bag, wallet, or bundle. It originally referred to the pouch used to carry correspondence and other important items. In 1775, frustrated by the Royal Mail's expense, unreliability, and threat to a free press, many colonists boycotted the British postal system. That same year, the Second Continental Congress established a postal service operated by the colonists themselves, with Benjamin Franklin serving as its first postmaster general. At this time, wax seals played an essential role. As we'll see in workshops presented by Mitch Mondello, wax seals not only secured correspondence, but also served as a form of authentication, verifying the sender and the integrity of the document. Red wax was often used to signify particular importance. Official documents tied with ribbon and sealed with red wax eventually gave rise to the expression red tape. After the Revolutionary War, New York City's population surged, creating a steady market for farmers in what is now Columbia County. However, getting goods down to the city meant hauling them west over rough roads to the Hudson River and the port city of Hudson, a city that had been chartered in 1785. In 1799, the New York State Legislature authorized the creation of the Columbia Turnpike Corporation for the purpose of improving the road from the city of Hudson to the line of Massachusetts on the route to Hartford. When the Columbia Turnpike was constructed, it was the first turnpike in Columbia County and the fifth in New York State. The legislature also gave rights to the corporation to use existing roads and approved the construction of 3 toll houses spaced about 10 miles apart. The revenues from the tolls paid by travelers covered the cost of construction and ongoing maintenance of the turnpike. The word turnpike came from the use of heavy wooden pikes swung aside by toll keepers after payment was made. As part of our exhibition programming, historian Peter Sapkowski will give an illustrated talk about the Columbia Turnpike and the two surviving toll houses, Westgate in present-day Greenport and Eastgate in Hillsdale, that is currently being restored. In another presentation, Hillsdale historian Chris Atkins will describe his extensive research used to determine the location of the long-lost third toll house, known as Middlegate, which disappeared sometime after 1907 when the turnpike closed. The former Columbia Turnpike is essentially today's routes 23 and 23B. Before organized stagecoach lines and local post offices emerged, taverns and inns served as essential stopping places for travelers and for post riders as drop-off points for mail. Hillsdale, near the Massachusetts border, became an important waypoint during the difficult route between Massachusetts and the Hudson River. As part of our exhibition programming, there will be registered site visits to two Revolutionary-era buildings in the Hillsdale Hamlet Historic District. Both buildings were built along the former Columbia Turnpike, the present-day Route 23, the Parla Foster House. A Georgian-style building dating from 1790 was built by Parla Foster, a veteran of the Revolutionary War. This building served as a home, a tavern, and a stagecoach stop. A tour will be conducted by Hillsdale historian Chris Atkins and owner Carrie Harrington. In their article about the Latting family, the Hillsdale historians Lauren Letelier and Chris Atkins write, "Built in 1814, the Latting Tavern is still standing and known today as the Hillsdale House. The tavern became a stagecoach stop on the Columbia Turnpike. This historic tavern has been in almost continuous operation since 1814 and is now owned by Corey and Carmen Barbado." If you look at the eastern gable end of the building, you can clearly see the contours of the original tavern, which was enlarged over the years. Although no major battles were fought in this region, the Revolution's human presence remains visible in local cemeteries and churchyards. Recent research by Hillsdale resident Gene Kiefer has identified 72 Revolutionary War veterans buried in Hillsdale alone. As Gene reports, for the 250th, I began digging into their service records and, as much as possible, their lives. Gene will give a talk on this fascinating subject in early October. Visitors will also be able to explore the historic Gallatin Reformed Church and its adjacent churchyard cemetery with Gallatin town historian Louisa Ruby, Melissa Curtis, and Bob Rogaszewski. The congregation was established in the 18th century, and the earliest known burial in the sprawling cemetery dates back to 1770. The cemetery also contains numerous graves from the Revolutionary era. A series of maps displayed in the exhibit will illustrate how, before, during, and after the Revolution, the territory that is now Columbia County did not exist as a separate county, but was instead formed from the southeastern portion of the original Albany County. Columbia County itself was established in 1786. In a special talk, historian Dan Haas will speak about his recently published book, South Taconic Stories, and will explore and explain the many boundary disputes between the province of New York and the Massachusetts Bay Colony, as well as conflicts over land tenure involving the Dutch patroonships and the Livingston Manor. These disputes often centered on demands for freehold ownership and greater local self-government. Visitors will also have the opportunity to register for a site visit to the 1731 Tri-State Marker, which established the original southwest corner of Massachusetts marking the boundary junction of Massachusetts, New York, and Connecticut. Now located on private property, the site visit will be led by the property owners, Carol Falsetti and Norman Osofsky. They will be joined by RJHS board member Jane Peck, who was part of the group that rediscovered the long-forgotten marker hidden for generations amidst thick underbrush. Through artifacts, maps, documents, tools, workshops, presentations, and site visits, Patriots, Plowshares, and Post Roads invites visitors to discover how ordinary people, local industries, and regional landscapes all contributed to the making of a new nation. We hope you will join us this summer as we explore chapters from our local journey to independence.